There's nothing like league. And this is the Betfred Super League. No! Got me here. It took a big chunk out of me. Bleeding. It's bleeding. Oh no, it's bleeding. The thing just ripped my ear off. What do you think?
Hello again, everyone, and welcome along to yet another edition of Eddie and Stevo, the podcast where we talk all things rugby league. And thanks as ever to our supporters, Betfred, the game's major sponsors. Well, so much to talk about and yet so little time to fit it all in. This week, coaches come and go. A couple of them are in a spot of bother for their outspoken comments recently. And, oh yes, we have a Challenge Cup final to look forward to. So where do we start? Well, I think with the biggest news of the week, that Warrington have a new coach. Sam Burgess will be here from the start of next season. Stevo, this is a surprise to say the least, but Warrington are really excited to welcome their new man.
Well, he's got the background, hasn't he? When you think about it, he's a tremendous player, good enough to actually be selected for England Rugby Union. And that's how adaptable that player has been. And I suppose in many ways, a lot of people in the UK will be shocked because he hasn't got a great pedigree in regards to coaching. Now, a couple of years ago, he coached the Arara Valley Axemen. They did make the final. And a lot of people are taking into consideration that he's been an assistant coach under one man called Wayne Bennett. Now, Wayne Bennett made it quite clear when he was going to the Dolphins that he wanted Sam Burgess to become as an assistant coach with him. So he's got it all planned out. But I'll give Sam his due. He was loyal to South Sydney, where he is in a position and still is an assistant coach. So it's not the first time we've had assistant coaches coming from down under. We have had so many, Eddie, that it's feasible that Warrington said, well, look, let's look through the list of former assistant coaches that have made wonderful success in the UK.
Well, Sam is a fantastic player, was a fantastic player, no doubt about that, and a brave player. But as you said, and the good thing about it is he's British and he's coming home from Australia. So that's fantastic news. But no first-team coaching experience, Stevo. Is this the last throw of the dice by the Warrington board and the Warrington chief executive to get things right?
Well, I think they've taken that gamble mainly on the fact what I've just stated is that the success rate is enormous from assistant coaches from Australia that have done good in the UK. Look, you can't fault him for his background in regards to knowing the game. And being at South Sydney at the time that Wayne Bennett was the coach, he was the captain, and therefore it's a very good selection. But at the same time, you've got to wonder whether it may just be a risk.
Well, I think it is a risk, but the one good thing that he has is that Gary Chambers, who's overseeing proceedings at Warrington until the end of this season, will move upstairs at Warrington next year and become the director of rugby. Steve, I remember when Darryl Powell was appointed as the Warrington coach, I raised a slight eyebrow that they decided to let Lee Briers go. He went to Wigan and now, of course, he's in Australia with the Brisbane Broncos. Lee was Warrington through and through. Gary Chambers, although he's a Cumbrian, he's got Warrington blood coursing through his veins as well. I think that could be a key appointment. Gary Chambers working alongside him.
Yeah, and I think he's a good support fella. And I'm glad that they've given him that opportunity to help Sam Burgess. But I'm with you, Eddie. It surprised me that Lee Briers actually left the club. If there was one player that club needed to just continue on, it was Lee Briers. I mean, they were not stupid, the Brisbane Broncos, to lash out straight away and say, we want Lee Briers in Australia. Now, if the Aussies and Walters, the coach, says we want him, why on earth would they let him go?
Well, I suppose all this means I've got to get my Bring Back Briers badges thrown in the bin. Just like my Briers for Britain badges. They're sitting in a box in the garage as well. But hey, one of these days, you never know.
Yeah, but you've also got to take into account that they did make an approach first to Justin Holbrook. Now, it was all signed, sealed and delivered, but he turned it down at the last minute. They would actually, look, according to the press, they were actually saying that it was organising his flights, etc., accommodation. Right up to that point, Justin Holbrook was definitely going to Warrington. Now, he's gone to the East Roosters, right, on a 3-year contract, and he will be an assistant to Trent Robinson. Now, Robinson has been under quite a lot of, shall we say, fire from the fans, saying that he's lost the players, that his techniques are a little bit outdated. So maybe it's a smart move on Trent Robinson's part and saying, well, look, Justin Holbrook, he's a man that can bring something different to the club. And he must be very confident. When you sign a 3-year contract, you've got to say he's got to have some influence. And I think it's a smart move by Trent Robinson because, as I say, a lot of the fans, they were saying, let's get rid of him.
Well, yeah, Justin Holbrook decided not to come to Warrington. That door closed. The one opened then for Sam Burgess. One thing I will say, Stevo, I've read reports up here that the television in Australia, Matty Johns on his Sunday night programme, has said he thinks that Sam will have a long and successful career. And he thinks that when he heads over to Warrington, he will do a great job. But here's the nub. He says, I think he will be back here coaching an NRL side. I hope that Sam isn't just looking at this as a stepping stone back to the NRL.
Well, you've got to say it is a stepping stone, Eddie. You can't just say, well, he's going to become a famous coach down under and he will be coming back to Australia. What if he doesn't become a success at Warrington? I can assure you that the Australian clubs won't be back knocking the door down to sign him up. So they've got to look at the risk. And it's easy. Look, you and I can say they're going to be a success. Matty Johns says he's going to be a success. There's only one way we can find out. And that we'll have to wait and see next season.
Indeed. He's 34 years old. I hope he's here for a long time. Now, there was one rumour that was knocking about as well, that Sean Long was linked with a move to Warrington as Burgess's assistant coach. Now, that has been blown out of the water, and more so, Sean Long, coach of Featherstone Rovers, sitting pretty at the top of the championship, heading, we think, for Super League. Sean Long has been sacked after 10 months in charge. He leaves them top of the table, 8 points clear, 7 rounds of the season to go. OK, his last game on Sunday was a defeat to the Halifax Panthers, but his record is 19 wins from 22 matches. This seems harsh to me, Stevo, really harsh.
Excuse me for smiling and laughing, but you must understand one thing, Eddie. What gets put out to the press might be true, and what goes at inside the club that nobody knows about. Now, to my way of thinking, it's more than just losing twice to Halifax. It's more than that, as far as I can see. You don't sack a coach that's been leading the league table all the way through just by losing one particular game. I think we might find out later a little bit more about this. It is unusual, but that's the reason why I went into the media, Eddie, and turned away from coaching. And I think I did the right thing.
Yes, I do as well, 100%. Well, the problem is, of course, that it's not just, as we know, and we've spoken about so many times on this podcast, it's not just about what happens on the field anymore. After this year, this is the last chance saloon for a club like Featherstone maybe to get into Super League. And they're plainly worried that come the big occasions like Halifax beat them in the Cup, Halifax beat them just last weekend. They're only sixth in the table, Halifax, but obviously the board at Featherstone at the moment think, well, hang on, we mightn't make it unless we make the change.
Maybe the publicity around Sean Long, you mentioned it yourself, that he was being thrown up as the new Warrington coach. That could upset the apple cart.
It could. Well, James Ford, the former York Knights head coach, he takes over, and it's his job now to get Featherstone into Super League at the end of the season. So that's Sean Long's departure. Of course, Andy Last was thrown out the door at Castleford last weekend. There were people in the ground having a sit-in after the big defeat by Huddersfield at Weldon Road. I mean, Andy Last's not been there 5 minutes either, and he was assistant to Lee Radford, and he moved up into the job himself. Now, he's had a shocking time, there's no doubt about that. Castleford, for one moment, dropped to the foot of the table at the weekend after they were beaten by Huddersfield on points difference. Then Wakefield went to Hull, and Wakefield went back down to the bottom of the table. But Last has gone, and the news now is that Danny Ward will be moving in, the former London Broncos coach, a former Castleford player. He will be dropping into the hot seat because next week, Wakefield Castleford sell out, and it's the £1 million game from 2006 all over again.
It certainly is. And it's, look, what we've been discussing brings up one word: panic.
Yes.
People who run these clubs sit round a table, the fans panic, they protest about getting rid of him, getting rid of so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. They panic. What can we do? I mean, we've already seen the two clubs, Castleford and Wakefield, have been searching all over the world for players that they can bring in. It's not new. It's been going on for years and years. Soon as you got to the point where the club risks being relegated, it's panic. And when you start panicking, all hell lets loose. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, just stand by the phone, Stevo. You might well get the call.
No way. I'm busy.
Danny Ward's got a great record, to be fair. He took London Broncos up, didn't he, in 2018? OK, they were relegated in 2019, but they went down with the best win percentage and the highest number of victories by any relegated side in history. He's got a hell of a job on his hands, though, to save Castleford with so few games remaining, and that massive match next weekend. Massive.
Yeah, it surprised me that getting rid of Last at a time when this game is coming up. You know, this is S and bust, isn't it? Let's think about it. You've got to say whoever wins that game will stay up. And it's all about a lot of money. It's all about a lot of players. It's all about, can we look towards the future? So it's not just about finding a coach or a new coach in panic. It's also finding someone that can come in and run the club to a point where they increase the crowds, increase the junior development. These are all things that are in the IMG proposals. I mean, take Leeds. Leeds have probably got the best ever junior development. They've had a junior development top of the tree for donkey's years.
I don't think too many people would argue with that. But let me just talk about Leeds in another vein for a moment. What on earth, as they're fighting for a top six playoff place, what on earth have they done in allowing Blake Austin to go to Castleford? I mean, they're struggling now in the halves. There's no doubt about that. Richie Myler is reportedly out for the rest of the season. Aidan Caesar is on his way out at the end of the season. You know, they looked bereft of ideas against Lee at the weekend, and Lee, came up with a fantastic win, and Leeds' top 6 ambitions now hanging by a thread.
Yeah, it was a bit confusing. As I say, we only get told what they want you to read or listen to. So therefore, trying to dig a little bit deeper is difficult. But it's amazing. It confused me, especially with the chance that they had, an outside chance of making the playoffs. But you wouldn't want to get rid of a player that perhaps has been a key factor in your season.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so either. But, players come and go, coaches come and go. We've talked a lot about coaches already this week. There's more to come. But I must give a mention to our old mate Barry McDermott, because he has called out the mindless trolls on Twitter, or X it's known as now, isn't it, for giving dog's abuse to both Andy Last and Darryl Powell over this last weekend. Barry says he agrees sport is a cutthroat business. It evokes passionate reactions, good, bad, and everything in between. But he says he has seen some horrible stuff about Darryl and Andy, who he says are two good men and who care about the game. Hear to that. They both tried and failed, he said, to deliver what was expected, and they have both lost their jobs. That's sport, he says. That's it. What isn't sport is some of the personal and vicious insults, he says, people should behave. And quite right too. Quite right too.
I agree with Barry. It is wrong for people to do that. But it happens all the time. Because the one thing about it is you're not facing a person who you're abusing. You don't run the risk of maybe getting a fistful in your mouth. You're doing it behind something which they call is technology. It's gone too far.
I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. Stevo, again, coaches, in all the talk about coaches coming and going this week, and what's happened at Warrington and Castleford and Featherstone, I must give a mention to Wakefield, because the axe could easily have fallen on Mark Applegarth at Wakefield as they plummeted down the table. I mean, they hadn't won for months, but now they are in with a chance. They were off the bottom of the table for the first time since round 2 at the weekend. The Wakefield board stuck by the man. They held their nerve, and he's starting to deliver. I just wonder whether owners, boards, chief executives, are they a bit quick to pull the trigger, do you think?
Do you really want me to tell you?
Yes.
Of course they are. They're quick to it. And I'll tell you something now. After about 5 or 6 games of the season, I said Wakefield are gone.
Yes.
I'll admit it. But I'll tell you something now. If Wakefield do beat Castleford and they do stay in Super League, then I reckon the Wakefield coach should be named Coach of the Year. Never mind how much glory or how many trophies you've won. This guy has produced something that nobody, and I think you've got to be honest, even the Wakefield fans would have said, well, we're doomed. But he didn't get the doom dust. We did. I did.
We all did. You're right. We all did. It looked like there was no chance on God's earth.
If they survive, Eddie, he should be Coach of the Year by a country mile.
Good shout. It's amazing to think, though, after last weekend and all this talk about coaches coming, going, players, Warrington were beaten 30-10 at home to Catalan. They moved up the table. They went to 5th because Hulkingston Rovers fielded a totally unrecognisable team at Wigan on Friday night and lost 64 points to 6. I mean,
yeah,
you can't believe it.
No, well, that's a points difference, as we all know. It's which does come into play, especially with the with the Castleford Wakefield situation.
Indeed.
Look, it was interesting to note that Hulkingston Rovers decided to put out a very, very weak side. So they were always going to get defeated. Simple as that. But not the Lee Leopards.
No,
now, that was interesting because they wanted those 2 table points. And that just shows you how looking forward to the future that the Leopards are. I reckon a lot of the clubs would have said, oh, we're at Wembley, and it's a great occasion, and we've got a chance to lift the trophy. But we don't want to run the risk of injuring our star players. They did take that risk, and I'm glad that they won.
It was a fantastic win.
They're a great side. They've got an impressive, strong pack. I mean, they've got Lachlan Lamb, who, to me, is going to be the key player at Wembley this weekend. Who would have thought there would have been such a high position in the league table at this point in time, Eddie? Who would have thought that?
Nobody. You wouldn't have got a price off the bookies, I'll tell you now. And you're right. They played their full-strength side at Leeds. They won there for the first time in over 40 years at Headingley, recorded a Super League double against the Rhinos in the process. Hull KR, on the other hand, fielded all these unrecognisable men, really, I suppose, even to the most ardent Rovers supporter, but they were battered, absolutely battered by Wigan. So where are we going at Wembley, Stevo? Where's the money riding now? Adrian Lamb wins the Cup for Lee. It'll be his 100th game as a head coach. Lee, clean bill of health, playing well. Hull Kingston Rovers, resting players coming in. Who's taking the gamble? Who's going to win? Where's your money riding, Stevo, for Wembley on Saturday?
Well, I favour the Lee Leopards, which will excite all the fans at Hull Kingston Rovers. Will disappoint all the fans in Lee. Look, I think that when you play the week before and you've still got that team spirit, that coordination, it's easy to do that. I'm not so sure about having a team that has not played contact football. Most of them have not played contact football for a fortnight. And that could well go against them. But the one thing that Hull KR have got is that Wembley is wide. So it's your three quarters that will win you the game. It's all right having a strong pack, which Lee certainly have, but it's out wide where you win games at Wembley. So, look, I think it's going to be a tremendous game. And the other thing about Lee as well, I mean, there's talk about Papua New Guinea wanting Lee and Adrian Lamb to take the team on a tour to PNG to help lift the profile of Papua New Guinean rugby league. Now, to my way of thinking, that is wonderful. And another thing that's wonderful about our game of rugby league is that we've finally decided, after the international meeting in Singapore, that we're going to have a World Cup in 2026. It might be in New Zealand, it might be in Australia. Either way, it's definitely on. And the return of the Ashes series. The Ashes in 2025 in the UK and down under 2028. So the tours to Australia. You know, the last tour down under was 2003. And I've mentioned it before that we seemed to forget about the International Rugby League. Whereas you've got to look at other sports, every young kid wants to play for their country. And we were on a risk factor, because I'll tell you down in Australia, what they want to do is they just want to concentrate on the state of origin. State of origin, that's the only thing. That's the only thing. That's all the youngsters are thinking about. And really what we want to keep our game flowing is international games. More the merrier. A lot of people were saying, well, why fly to Singapore to sort that out? A lot of people are saying, oh, well, you know, it's a nice trip. I don't care whether it's a nice trip. The most important thing about is that we were going to have a future now for International Rugby League.
Yeah, it's positive news. Stevo, it is positive news if it comes off, because you know as well as I do, we've heard similar things before. Let's see if they can now deliver.
Well, we have to make sure and ensure that we're going to back it, that the NRL have got to do exactly the same thing. It's building confidence within our game. I mean, you think back, Eddie, 20 years ago was the last time that we had an Ashes series.
I know. I think we were there for that too, weren't we? We were in Australia for that, you and I.
Yeah. And
I know. And it makes your blood tingles when the Ashes are on, don't it? I mean, that's the big regret that I've got, that we were never in the commentary box when Great Britain beat Australia in an Ashes series. Big regret.
Well, yeah, it was, but we still enjoyed the entertainment and the free wine and the food.
You speak for yourself. You speak for yourself.
And also, adding to that, remember we said last week, NRL games at the start of next year, they're going to Vegas, as we mentioned.
Yes.
So we're looking forward, Eddie. We're not hanging back. We're looking forward. Whether it comes to fruition, I don't know. But at least the international board have laid down a plan.
Yes, they have. And it's great, great news. And let's keep our fingers crossed. Blimey, Stevo, we've talked about some issues this week. We started with coaches. We've gone on the field of play. We've talked about Wembley. We've talked about the internationals. We're just going to end this week with another coaching story, because Paul Rowley and Paul Wellens, they are now summoned to talk to the Rugby Football League's compliance department for their recent comments. Do you remember Paul Wellens the other week said he felt the game had let his players down with the John Asiata tackles in the game against Lee in the semi-final? Yep. Rowley now has branded referee Jack Smith a disgrace after seeing his side fall to an 18-15 defeat against St Helens at the weekend. He said it's 3 home games in a row now where we've been absolutely let down by the officials. He said, it's so hard. I think Jack Smith, I've watched him on telly. He's been a disgrace a few times this year. One for us at home against Warrington. So 3 games in a row now, we've been absolutely let down. I think Paul Rowley will be looking at his bank balance shortly, because I think a fine might be following. They don't like criticism like that, do they, in the compliance department?
No, but at the same time, the appliance department may say, right, it's going to cost you X. And when they make these statements, they knew that they were going against the grain. They knew that they could possibly be fined. But you've got to say to yourself, well, I'm glad they brought it up, because at least it works both ways. If you've got a complaint, right, and you run the risk of it costing you money, then I say fair play. You can't just sit back and cop it sweet, but at least it's been brought out into the open. It's not done underneath, where the fans and the people that enjoy rugby league can say, and hopefully the people that run the game will say, yes, let's see whether the quality of our referees, whether our touch judges, etc., any official that is accorded one, whether it be looking at the video screens, etc., and so forth, they've also got to come up with as near to 100% as possible. So I don't begrudge those 2 coaches having an outlash.
I accept what you say, but shouldn't coaches be above all that? Shouldn't that be kept private, really? I think it's an expensive outburst from both of them. We'll wait and see, of course, and I don't want to prejudge, but I think they might be hit in the pocket.
Oh, without a doubt. But I am proud to think that people who are involved in our game have got the guts and the determination to be able to come out with something that, hey, come on, let's have a look at this.
As I say, we've gone all over everything this week. It's been a pleasure to talk as ever, and enjoy Wembley. I'm sure you will. And if the Lee supporters are worried, well, you should be even more worried now, because Stevo's tipped you to win the thing. Anyway, we'll pick the bones out of it all next week, and we'll look ahead to the £1 million match in any other year, Wakefield against Castleford. It'll be good to talk to you and get your Wembley thoughts next week. Thanks for being there, Stevo. See you next week.
Take care, top man.